Alright, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from RicoScores, and I'm coming to y'all with a breakdown of everything that went down today in day 10 of the 2024 Washington Commanders training camp practice. We have a lot to talk about today. Now, just to let you know, I will not be breaking down and reacting to the first unofficial depth chart that the Commanders have put out yet. This video is already going to be an hour long, so we're going to save that for tomorrow. Well, by the time y'all are watching this, just know Wednesday, August 7th is when I'll go ahead and break that down, because I don't believe we practice anyway, so that's an open day for me to go ahead and knock that out. But of course, we're here to talk about Jaden Daniels and Brandon Coleman starting versus the Jets briefly. We're going to talk about how my dog Armani Rodgers got cut. Whew, I was sick to my stomach when I saw that. I was getting my tires changed, saw that notification, and almost sank into the seat, man. And then the offensive line is really banged up. We got to talk about that. We have some rookies that were named starters. That's pretty impressive. The Rivera guys are either down the depth chart or cut just straight up. The Washington Commanders are making several moves after practice as well. And Brian Robinson is a deadly receiving back, on top of a lot of other things. Again, you already know how these videos go, but if you're new, we go position group by position group for everything that went down before, during, and after practice today. We talk about quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, everything, all the way through the offense, all the way through the defense, and even special teams. And I will update y'all on this, like the kicker competition that's going on right now. Of course, we have a lot to talk about. We even have Dan Quinn, Joe Witt Jr., and Cliff Kingsbury speaking before and after practice today. We're going to dive into some of their most notable and important quotes as well. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button, so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all the content. Really appreciate y'all for supporting all of the videos and making sure y'all leave likes. And y'all already know, man, I really, if I was just super busy today, I had to leave my house like 3 times today. It was so much going on. That's why this video is coming out so late. But y'all know, when I finally find some time, I'm gonna really try to read and reply to as many comments as I possibly can. So make sure you leave comments in the video. Do not leave without leaving a like. And let's go ahead and dive into this video right now, man. Let's get it. Adam. And before we move on to anything else, shouts out to my dog Warren for the big time Cash App donation, man. Really appreciate my dog. And also shouts out to my dog Reggie T for a big time Cash App donation as well. I really appreciate y'all. And I feel like the very least I could do is shout y'all out in my upcoming videos after y'all donate. So I really appreciate that. Make sure y'all stay tuned too, because we're about to start live streaming because of the preseason game, so stay tuned for that. I'm really excited about that. And then also, again, just to remind you, I will do a live, like a full, not a live, but a full breakdown and reaction to the unofficial depth chart that the Commanders team just came out with themselves. And I'm also going to compare it to what I tried to predict before they came out with the depth chart, where I went wrong. But I also want to break down some myths, because some things they have in that unofficial depth chart aren't actually reflective of what the real depth chart is right now. We're gonna dive into all of that when we get to that, but for now on, let's go ahead and get to this practice, man. And shouts out to Scott Abraham for this tweet before practice started way early in the morning, because he pointed out a few notable things. It was last day with fans, and it was supposed to be pads. We're gonna talk about that soon. It was supposed to be pads today, but we know for a fact that it was the last day that fans can attend practice for the remainder of training camp. That's crazy. There are probably gonna be some closed practices where nobody's allowed, but we'll probably at least still have a few practices where the media members are allowed to go. But fans, done. That's it for that. And poor Kevin Durant, because you know he would have went to one of these practices if he wasn't over there in Paris with the Olympics. So I know he's a little sad about that. I'm pretty sure he thought about that, but it is what it is. You could be there next year, man. But either way, the depth chart was released at 9 a.m. Practice started at 9 a.m. Melba, one of the biggest burgundy and gold fans, doing it. She celebrated a 100-year-old birthday today. today. Daryl Green was here. Joe Gibbs was here. Even the team dog Barney was here. It was kind of like the big finale to fan open training camp. Everybody and their mama pulled up. It was really cool, man. And then also, Daryl Green didn't just pull up by himself. He pulled up with 200 underserved kids as well. That's big time, man. I mean, it was just such a monumental day, like a real good exclamation point for the last day that fans could pull up. I mean, just Joe Gibbs pulling up alone, let alone Daryl Green on top of it. I wish I was there, man. That sounded like a great time. Also, Washington, it worked out a couple of free agent offensive linemen today because we do have injuries along the offensive line, and we're potentially going to sign one of those guys leading up to this Jets game, which we ended up doing after practice. We're going to dive into that too before we get into practice. And then also, like I foreshadowed a little bit earlier, like I alluded to just a tiny bit, today's practice was originally scheduled to be a padded practice, but it ended up not being padded, and I feel like injuries had a large part to deal with that. But it's weird because the offensive line is probably the most hurt part of our team right now. And from what I'm hearing, they were the only ones that did wear pads today in practice. So I don't exactly know what's going on. Really interesting situation. But it was originally supposed to be a padded practice for everybody, and then it ended up only being padded for the offensive linemen. From what I'm hearing, the district literally said that I'm seeing linemen wearing pads, but nobody else. Also, just to remind y'all, the Jets joint practice with the Commanders will be Thursday. So I believe they have Wednesday, August 7th off, and then Thursday, August 8th, we get down to the nitty gritty. We're going to talk about joint practice fights and the potential of that happening between the Commanders and Jets later on towards the end of the video after we get through all of the position groups. Also, shouts out to David Harrison for pointing this out because the Commanders are making quick work getting the old turf ripped up of that one practice field. We talked about this like weeks ago. The Commanders were completely like starting over with one of the practice fields, and it's crazy because it's the one that's closest to the facilities and like the actual locker room that the players come out of. Players, coaches, everybody have to walk over this practice field to get to the ones that they actually practice on. Dan Snyder and I don't know, whatever that whole past regime just never felt it necessary to completely just overhaul that. Josh Harris, within 1 year of being our owner, came in and started to get the work on that. And so basically the ground is being re-leveled after the old turf got ripped up, and now they have new grass going down. So it looked like they were laying down like the side pads and things like that. Man, I've done just about anything you could do with yard work, so I know how that works. And shouts out to Mitch Tisler because he tweeted with the video that you're seeing right now, "Gone are the days of a useless turf field in Ashburn. The eyesore of eyesores is finally gone. Fourth practice field will be ready in a few weeks." So as soon as this season, they're going to add that additional practice field. We will now have 4 of them to practice with. I thought that was pretty cool. And so by the time we get back around this time next year and fans are allowed to come back to training camp, there will be an additional field there. Also, shouts out to Mason Kinahan because he went to practice today and he pointed out the fact that he even saw a Sua Cravens jersey today, and that's a name that completely forgot about. He has so much potential. I believe he came out of USC. I remember when we drafted him, a lot of people were hyping him up and things like that. But either way, that's just a really random name to throw out there. And then shouts out to Mitch Tisler again because you know he keeps up with who's the first out to practice every day. And then he tweeted today, I don't even know any more of camp so far, but it is day 10. Technically day 10 that we know of because they've had some practices that weren't open to the media, fans, nobody. They just kind of held it and it was team only, need to know basis only. Only the players, coaches, and front office members that literally work for the team directly. I don't even think guys like John Com were allowed at those practices. But as far as practices that we've gotten any information on, we're at 10. But he went on to tweet to say the first commander to the field is, drum roll, a photo finish. Jaden Daniels was the first out the door, but he said that he believes Bryson Tremaine actually touched the grass first. And so that's actually a pretty cool thing. So it just seems like it's always a combination of Bryson Tremaine, Sam Hartman, and Jaden Daniels that are the first ones onto the field. Now, before we move on to injuries and what Dan Quinn and those guys had to say, y'all need to go ahead and buckle up because we have a lot to talk about before we even get to what actually happened in practice practice today. We have roster moves that we're about to talk about now. We have injuries, and then we have a lot of really important and notable quotes from several coaches on this staff. Of course, Dan Quinn, Joe Wood Jr., Cliff Kingsbury. Then we'll get to the quarterbacks. But for now, roster moves, and of course, I shed a tear because the Commanders signed center/guard interior offensive lineman J.C. Hassenauer, I believe that's how you pronounce that. And then we also waived tackle Alex Akambulu with the injury designation. Remember, he was carted off the field a couple of days ago. And then we also released tight end Armani Rodgers. I know I'm sick to my stomach about this. I may talk about it in greater detail in another video, but again, we're going to be here forever already. And also, I don't even have it in me to talk about my boy Armani Rodgers right now. I hate to see him go. But Jamal, at Let Maul Tell It, make sure you follow him on Twitter, follow his YouTube. He does things for Hogs Haven, all 22 film sessions, all of that. He brings up a great point. Armani Rodgers really had a great shot at showing something, and injuries just can screw with your trajectory at the snap of a finger. And I heard he was making plays throughout training camp. I've heard more about him than I've heard about Cole Turner so far in training camp, so I'm very surprised. But John Comm also brought up a good point as well. He said the new group did sign undrafted free agent tight end Kosan Yankov. You got to remember, Armani Rodgers was just a guy that was still here from last year, but they went and sought out Kosan Yankov themselves after the draft. And he also continued to say that he's been working with some of the special teams groups. At times, he's been with the first field goal protection group. So it sounds like Kosan Yankov may make this team just special teams alone. And you already know Ben Sinnott and Zach Ertz are automatically two of your tight ends as well. And then you have John Bates too. So that's 4 right there because of Kosan Yankov being a tight end, but also / fullback. But most importantly, like John Comm points out, a very important piece of our special teams unit. And then he also pointed out the fact that there were times today where he was as the wing opposite of Ben Sinnott in team drills today. So they're really trying to get Kosan Yankov going to where he can contribute on special teams, but also potentially double up as an actual tight end, which is where he is on the depth chart. As of right now, he's purely special teams, but they're trying to work his way up to where he can contribute on offense potentially if he has to. And then as far as offensive lineman J.C. Hassenauer, I believe that's how you pronounce that. The veteran offensive lineman has started 7 of his 45 career games with the Steelers and was previously on the Giants but missed the season due to a torn tricep. And this is a guy that we're bringing in for extreme depth right now. We have a lot of injuries. We're going to get to that soon. And then even after all of that, you're like, well, we still have a roster spot open because this was 6 hours ago. This was like 4 p.m. around that they announced that we signed a center guard, interior offensive lineman. We waived Alex Akambulu and released tight Armani Rodgers. That's a net negative of 1 right there. We cut 2 players and only signed 1. So I was questioning for the past few hours, like, okay, so what are we doing with that last spot that's still open right now? And so I'm kind of glad in this way that I am coming out with this video a little late, because as of 8:30, I saw UFL analyst Michael Del Negro tweet the fact and announce that the Washington Commanders assigned Stallions offensive tackle Armani Taylor Prelot. And that makes a lot of sense, because I was wondering, okay, even beyond the fact that we just netted negative, cutting 2 players, only signing 1, so I was like, we got to be signing somebody else. Another reason I thought, okay, we got to be signing somebody else is because we have more injuries to the tackle room right now than even the interior offensive line room. I mean, we have injuries to both, but I was like, if anything, we need a tackle that we need to bring in, a random tackle, a camp body, whatever, more than we need to for an interior offensive lineman. But there you go, two offensive linemen, 1 interior, 1 tackle, and then we released our tackle and released our tight end. Sadly, my boy Armani Rodgers. Now moving on to the injuries, Samuel Cosmi was out today due to illness. I believe he's been out for the past couple of practices, and apparently it's the type of illness to where it seems like they're not having him at practice right now because they don't want him spreading it to anybody else. So it's maybe not something we should necessarily have to worry about. Nobody said anything about COVID or whatever. Either way, we just know that Samuel Cosmi's dealing with the illness from what I've heard so far. Then Mitch Sisler also pointed out the fact that Brandon Coleman didn't have a helmet on at practice today and hadn't done any work in team drills, 11-on-11s, goal line, nothing. I mean, we were to a point where the starting offensive line today was Michael Dieter replacing Samuel Cosmi at right guard. You had Cornelius Lucas at left tackle, I believe. I think we had Trent Scott at right tackle. And then you had, of course, Nick Allegretti at left guard, and Tyler Biotish at center. But that was just starting O-line today. And so if that's your starting O-line, imagine what the backups look like out there. I mean, the injuries are definitely affecting us right now. And so, I mean, right now, our projected starting defensive line is pretty banged up. Something I'm definitely worried about, especially heading into these Jets joint practices. But as long as they're healthy and ready to go by week 1, we should be fine. But the main thing is, I keep trying to emphasize this, that chemistry is probably the most important reason and the most important trait for an offensive line to succeed. And right now, with these guys hurt, they're not being able to take the time and the reps to learn each other side to side. We already have an open competition for some of the offensive line spots, so there's already a lack of chemistry there from us rotating guys in and out. Now guys are starting to get hurt. It's just like, where's the chemistry right now? So it's definitely making me apprehensive about being extremely optimistic going into the Tampa Bay game. I mean, you never know. Maybe Jaden Daniels is that great to where he makes up for it. But right now, I'm not very optimistic about what this offensive line is going to look like heading into week 1. But we'll see. Hopefully, they can get back healthy. They can turn it around. We look good against the Jets and Dolphins in joint practices and preseason games. And then the moment in time where they were hurt is just a blur. That's best case scenario right now. But as of right now, it's not looking too good looking ahead. Now, coaching wise, again, Dan Quinn pointed out the fact that Joe Gibbs and Darrell Green were here. He said that he was excited to have legends Joe Gibbs and Darrell Green present today. And he also emphasized that he wanted to see a lot of wide receiver versus defensive back one-on-ones today, especially in the red zone as well. And you're going to see some clips from that when we dive into what happened today in practice. We're going to talk about a lot of things that happened, but you're also going to see some clips of it provided by the Washington Commanders themselves, because they're the only ones that are allowed to show any like real practice drill moments. If it's like individual drills, like guys warming up, then sometimes the media members can upload those clips. But like when it comes to like Jaden Daniels throwing a dot versus a certain coverage and it's like multiple players out there, the only people that's allowed to upload that is the Washington Commanders, and they do a good job of making sure they don't show you much of what's going on. You see the quarterback, then you see them zoom in on the ball in the air, and then it just suddenly drops down on the receiver and the DB making the play at the end. They don't show you no routes, they don't show you no formations, nothing. And that's definitely intentional from the Washington Commanders side of things. I wish we had more access, but at the end of the day, like I keep saying in a lot of different videos, I prefer for them to shut down access and win games in the regular season than to allow us to see the entire process and be extremely transparent during the offseason, and we go out there to lose. I'll take winning and I don't know what's going on any day of the week. And then going back to Darrell Green and Joe Gibbs, they talked to the team after practice. Dan Quinn said that they would before practice, and they actually ended up doing it, and it was a really cool, funny moment from Joe Gibbs there as well. Make sure you go check out that clip from the Washington Commanders official Twitter account. And then shouts out to Spider Strick on Twitter, because he brought up a great point. He said, man, Joe Gibbs looks like he got into his 60s and then just stopped aging. Completely agree. And then he also said that Darrell Green looks like he can still cover a lot of wide receivers at the NFL level. Those guys look amazing. I'm right with them. Completely agree. And then shouts out to Joe Gibbs because he brought his 1991 ring with him when he pulled up to practice today. I love that. And then some of the most important quotes from Dan Quinn's presser. He joked about the upcoming first depth chart release and said that the Commanders PR boss Sean had a big part in that. If I had a real depth chart right now, I'd probably have 15 starters. And maybe that was some of Dan Quinn's influence, because I don't know if y'all noticed, but in that first depth chart that the team has released, there were 12 starters on both sides of the ball, both offense and defense. 12 starters. You had like an extra running back out there for the offense, and then you had like an additional linebacker / edge rusher out there for the defense. So I thought that was pretty interesting. First of all, John Com said in his podcast afterwards that, I mean, he basically reaffirmed that, yeah, like the team has something to deal with that, but this is more so like the Washington Commanders staff putting together this depth chart. It's not like Dan Quinn literally last night was working on that to release it today. They kind of had something to deal with it, but again, don't read into it too much, because that was the staff doing that. And then also, Dan Quinn mentioned that Jaden Daniels, of course, is the quarterback one for the Commanders, the starting quarterback for the first unofficial depth chart, and he will start Saturday's preseason game against the Jets. And Joe Theismann tweeted about that and said that I like that Jaden is going to get some work in the preseason. And I was like, wait a minute. Weren't you literally just the one that said Jaden Daniels shouldn't play a single snap in the preseason? What changed? What happened from then to now? Just in a few weeks time span, I don't know what could have changed. And then also, Dan Quinn said that he likes Jaden Daniels and Brandon Coleman enough to where they're both going to start. And he said, quote, both he and Jaden have earned that right, unquote. So you have your starting left tackle and your starting quarterback, both rookies, it looks like right now. And shouts out to ___ Tone on Twitter, because he brings up a great point. If we found both quarterback and left tackle in the draft, both franchise guys in one draft, AP might need a statue. I'm right with him, man. I mean, that's incredible. Especially with Brandon Coleman being a 3rd round pick that most teams, most people completely overlook. And then Dan Quinn, shouts out to JP Finley for pointing this out. Dan Quinn talked about quarterbacks. He said, quote, some may play more in practice than they do in the game, unquote. Translation, basically, Jaden gets a ton of work versus the Jets in joint practices, but not a ton in preseason. And then Driscoll and Hartman will get a lot of work in the actual preseason game. Ben Standig agrees. He said, QB plan for Saturday. Quinn says that the hope is for all 4 to get reps, but the joint practice reps also factor into the plan, and it sounds like Jaden Daniels and Mariota will get more work in joint practice, with Jeff Driscoll and Sam Hartman getting more work in the game. And that was kind of assumed. I forgot who said it, who called it like a few days ago. It was either John Com, Logan Paulson, somebody, but one of the media members did pretty much guess that like Jaden Daniels is probably going to get a lot of work versus the Jets in the joint practice. When we get to the preseason games, it's kind of the backups. Now maybe like the official starter, who was assumed to be Jaden Daniels, will get more work in the second game as we get warmed up, and then maybe the third game he probably doesn't play at all. Just to give you the heads up of what the schedule could end up being, we'll see. Now let's talk about what Joe Witt Jr. had to say today at practice. After practice, he addressed the media, and he said that he feels good about the speed of the defense and how they're running to the ball. And coaches have done a good job of teaching as well, and wants to see more ball production and more playmaking from the defense. He wants more. He wants more. I mean, again, you don't lead the NFL in turnovers over the last 3 years for no reason. There's a certain expectation that they have for the defense that they run, and they want this team to get as close to that as possible and hopefully overachieve and even surpass what the Cowboys have done the past 3 years. And then Joe Witt Jr. talked about the first preseason game. It was a question from Sam Fortier, and he said, quote, we play with aggression, the effort, the speed that we talk about. Words are words. And if we don't go out there and do it, it's been a bunch of BS. And he actually said like the actual cuss word. And then Joe Witt Jr. also said, quote, words mean nothing if you don't do it on game day, unquote. Joe Witt Jr. also said that he's going to be simple in the defense, as he calls, for now, because we're just trying to see who can cover, who can tackle, and who can rush. We're trying to isolate to see who's actually good, and then we'll start to add layers to the defense to bring out the best of these guys. But right now, we're trying to keep it as plain as possible, basically, to see who stands out the most and who deserves to play the most snaps. Joe Witt Jr. also said that it's, quote, a now or next league, unquote. And what do you do now determines what you can do next. Stresses the importance of preseason performances. This is not just some random scrimmage. These matter. Now moving on to the quarterbacks, and we're getting closer to what actually happened in practice today. Even though we're already 24 minutes into the video, I apologize for that. But I know a lot of y'all would still want to hear about all of this pre-practice stuff as well. All of the things that happen outside of practice. I know I do. I know I would. That's why I'm giving it to y'all. But we're almost there. We're about to start talking about practice. And Dan Quinn talked about Jaden Daniels before practice, and he said that Jaden Daniels has, quote, surpassed my expectations of readiness and of the command of the position. And he said that he's not surprised Daniels knows the system given how he works, and said that teammates gravitate towards him. Those are all compliments that we love to hear. And shouts out to my boy at KMBMoreX. He said, so in other words, JD is the man, and everyone from ownership down to the players know. I completely agree. Love that analysis right there. Also, Cliff Kingsbury spoke at practice today, and he said that he loves the process that Daniels goes through every day, and the way that he's handling himself, and he appreciate the work that he puts in to get to the point that he is right now. This is not by accident. This is not luck. Jaden Daniels is working really hard to be where he's at already as far as his development goes. Kingsbury also said that he's seen consistency in Daniels each and every day, from what he does on the field and how he treats people. He's been a very consistent guy that just seems to be what he literally is. This is just not for show when the cameras are rolling. And then Cliff Kingsbury was chuckling when he talked about Jaden Daniels buying into the notion of sliding. He said, quote, he will, unquote, and said that that they harped on it a lot in camp, and so they're definitely getting him to improve in that area. Definitely one of my worries, Jaden Daniels. You better get the sliding and avoid taking those hits, man, please. Also, shouts out to Ben Standig, because he did a story on what Cliff Kingsbury said in practice today and things like that. And when it comes to the preseason opener for Jaden Daniels, Cliff Kingsbury said, quote, Jaden must study like crazy at night, because every morning when we get here, he walks through plays with us and he nails it, unquote. And that's been something that we've been hearing since voluntary OTAs. This guy, Zach Ertz, pointed it out a couple of months ago, that like every time they come into practice and they move on to the next part of the offense, they add an extra layer. Jaden Daniels is already has it memorized front to back, knows the ins and outs of it and everything like that. That is a huge compliment from your offensive coordinator. It really doesn't get much better than that. Being as prepared as humanly possible, you can't really do much else than that. And then speaking of Zach Ertz, after practice, when interviewing with News 4 Sports, he said about Jaden Daniels, quote, a lot of times you talk about rookies, it's like this guy is going to be really good, but he said Jaden is good now, unquote. And hey, man, that's as high of a compliment as you can get from a guy like Zach Ertz. It's been around other good quarterbacks. Back there at the time when he had it with Philly, of course, even Kyler Murray with the Cardinals as well. That type of compliment for Jaden Daniels holds weight from a guy, a veteran like Zach Ertz, that has been around, and has been around a few good quarterbacks as well. Now let's move on to some early drills before we actually get into like the team stuff. And shouts out to JP Finley for tweeting this, because it's just showing the Commanders working on doing some simulated pass rush for Jaden Daniels for him to adjust the guys getting after him. And then shouts out to Jaden Daniels for this great throw to De'Ami Brown deep down the field on this clip that you're seeing right now. Man, I love Jaden Daniels' accuracy, especially deep ball accuracy, man. That's going to keep defenses on their toes and open up this run game so well. I'm super excited. Now let's move on to what actually happened in practice. First of all, shouts out to Mason Kinahan, because he said the internet is spotty right now. And I've been hearing a lot of people complaining about the internet down there, and it's hard for them to really update live, because it's just like no internet to even write a tweet or upload a clip that they just recorded for it to even get to the internet for us to see. But he basically said that it was an up and down day for Jaden Daniels at a certain point. This was about 10:19 a.m. But later on, he had a fantastic play with a great throw to Zach Ertz, who made a great one-handed catch, and it was really play of the day for sure. And here it is if you wanted to see it. And then that same Mason Kinahan ended practice like an hour later after practice, said Jaden Daniels' practice stat line to end the day, 7 of 10 with 1 sack. And he said he had a couple of great throws to Tremaine and Ertz, but missed badly on a few of his incompletions. Also, note that he was under pressure a lot, since he was missing 3 out of the 5 projected starters on the offensive line against Samuel Cosme. Then you had your starting right tackle in Andrew Wiley, and your starting left tackle in Brandon Coleman all out. You only had 2 starting offensive linemen out there, so I guess we should have assumed that Jaden Daniels would be under duress today, and we also need to take that into account. But at the end of the day, even with all of that, he was still 7 of 10, and so he had a couple of bad throws, and apparently, like, the throws that he missed, he really missed. It was just like something completely off. But I feel like the only reason that this is even any type of news worth talking about is because he's been so great so far that we've raised the bar on what we expect from him in these training camp practices. Like, think about it. If I told you 4 months ago that Jaden Daniels went 7 of 10 on throwing in a practice, you would be like, great, let's go. Yes, sir. That's what we want. But now that we've reached this point where when he goes 7 out of 10, but then those misses that he had were pretty big misses. They weren't drops this time by the receivers like they were the previous practice. This time it was because he was inaccurate a couple of times today. Now we're looking at him kind of funny. And people are saying that he had an off day and up and down day and things like that. But I'm like, 7 of 10? Come on, man. Like, all day, let's just slow that down a little bit. Let's not forget that he's a rookie, first of all. And then also, on top of that, I would love to see some of these stats that are coming from Drake May with the Patriots, or even Caleb Williams of the Bears, all of these other rookie quarterbacks that are out right now. But especially, please let me know, like, what Drake May is doing. I'm quite sure Patriots fans would love a 7 of 10 day from Drake May right now in practices, from what I've been hearing and seeing from the random things from the Drake May and Patriots practice experience right now in training camp. And then lastly, before we move on to the quarterbacks, from the quarterbacks to the running backs, shouts out to Ref the District, because I agree with this point. This is a great point. He said you can tell the season is getting closer because Daniels and Mariota are getting all of the snaps and full team work right now. They're not even thinking about rotating anybody else. And then eventually we're going to get to the point where Jaden Daniels is getting all of the first team reps, and he's no longer even splitting it with Marcus Mariota. Now moving on to the running backs, shouts out to Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler, because we're hearing great things about them, not only just today but overall training camp. But Cliff Kingsbury in his presser said that Austin Eckler hasn't lost a step and has met all of his expectations. And he also said that he's really excited for the dynamic duo between Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson. Trust me, I am too. And then also shouts out to Zach Selby, because he pointed out the fact that Brian Robinson provided another example of how he can thrive as a pass catcher by making a one-handed catch from Jaden Daniels before turning upfield today in practice. I'm telling y'all, stop sleeping on Brian Robinson, the receiving running back, the third down running back. He is electric. Just go back and look at what he did in the times that he finally got the opportunities in Eric Bieniemy's system last year. And I think Cliff Kingsbury is going to do a way better job of getting the ball to him than Eric Bieniemy did last year. Also, just improved quarterback play is going to help a lot there as well. And then shouts out to Scott Abraham, because speaking of Brian Robinson, he did an interview with Brian Robinson, and there were a lot of great quotes to take from it. But one of the biggest ones was when Brian Robinson said, quote, "This is going to be one where I can go out and be free and just play and be happy. One of those perfect feelings, man," unquote. And he was talking about how much he is excited about this offense that Cliff Kingsbury is installing for them, and that he feels like this is going to be the best season he's ever had because of the offense that Cliff Kingsbury has and the guys that are around him and everything like that. Now moving on to the wide receiver position, I know y'all saw Olamide Zaccheaus was like the third wide receiver on the depth chart, technically. Like, it was Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Olamide over De'Ami Brown and Luke McCaffrey. And then today, Zach Selby said that Olamide Zaccheaus has established himself as one of the key pieces on the receiving corps. He has looked impressive since camp began, both in one-on-one drills and team periods. He was Daniels' first target during an 11-on-11 session, resulting in a nice gain near the middle of the field. Later in practice, he sprinted for the end zone long after the play was over to show some extra effort. This guy's doing everything that he can to make this team, and I've been giving y'all these training camp updates after every practice, and Olamide Zaccheaus' name has come up a lot. I'm surprised still that he's up there with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson as the starters on the depth chart, because that's not reflective of how they've actually been on the field. De'Ami Brown, if anything, has been on the field with the starters more than Olamide, but for some reason, that's how they chose to do the depth chart. But I'm not too mad, because Olamide Zaccheaus has been balling out, dating all the way back to the voluntary OTAs. I kept telling y'all, like, hey, watch out for Olamide Zaccheaus. He's been making plays. That's a name that keeps coming up, and it's still coming up. And then also, the very next play after that great Jaden Daniels to Zach Ertz play that we talked about earlier, Jaden Daniels threw a really good deep ball to Bryson Tremaine, and he caught it over Mike Davis, and that's a big compliment to Jaden Daniels, of course, as well. But I'm mainly here to talk about it in the receiver section because Bryson Tremaine just keeps making plays. Shouts out to Ref the District for saying Tremaine comes up holding his shoulder, though, after the play on the sideline being looked at by the trainers, and then Soon after that, he tweeted, looks to be okay, back in with the wide receiver rotation. So he was a little banged up, but he went back in. But either way, Zach Selby said in his article after practice, it's also time to start giving Bryson Tremaine serious consideration as one of the players deserving of a roster spot. He was routinely coming up on big explosive plays down the field. Not even just big plays in general, but he's been a consistent deep ball threat with his height and everything. And he had another one on a pass from Jaden Daniels today. Tremaine, 6'4", 212 pounds, almost 6'5", is the biggest and tallest receiver currently on roster by at least 2 inches of height. And if he does end up making the cut, he can provide the Commanders with a different skill set in a position that is full of smaller, quicker wideouts. And I've been screaming that since last year. Since this time last year, I've been screaming, I hope Bryson Tremaine somehow is good enough to make this roster. Don't just give him the spot just simply because he's the tallest receiver, but I hope he's good enough to earn the spot regardless of whether he's tall or not, because I would love to have some height in the receiver room. And Logan Paulson even talked about a couple of days ago how Bryson Tremaine has been one of the more dependable deep threat targets on this team. I think he may end up making this team. My boy Rio Robinson, make sure you follow him on Twitter, YouTube, subscribe to him, everything, man. You know that's my dog over there. He brought up a good point about Bryson Tremaine. He tweeted, Bryson Tremaine's name comes up every day from practice. He may fry in the preseason. So even just beyond, before we even get ahead of ourselves and talk about him making the roster, I completely agree with Rio. I think Bryson Tremaine is going to go out there in that preseason game against the Jets and really put his name on the map. I'm really excited about that. He may even get some times with the ones just to kind of show what he can do. And then Zach Selby pointed out the fact that Cliff Kingsbury said that Jahan Dotson had tremendous ball skills. Once he gets comfortable in the system, Kingsbury thinks that he's really going to take off. And I'm right with him. I think Jahan Dotson is destined for a great season. I really am. I'm seeing the signs. I'm seeing and hearing about the moments he's having in practice and the chemistry that he's already has growing with Jaden Daniels. I think Jahan Dotson is going to be a deadly receiver for us this year, man. I'm really excited. And then shouts out to Scott Abraham for pointing this out, because at a certain point in practice, he pointed out the fact that Terry McLaurin never stops working. This is a period of practice today that was supposed to be a break for the skill position players, but that didn't stop Terry McLaurin from working on his hands, low ball, high ball, whatever. This is the time when everybody that's like a receiver and such are supposed to just be chilling, taking your time, taking a break, taking a breather or whatever. Terry McLaurin's like, nah, if I'm going to be here at practice, I'm going to be practicing 24/7. I absolutely love that. And then moving on to the tight end room, of course, my boy Armani Rodgers is gone. Of course, I'm sad about it. But moving on, the reason that I'm bringing it back up now in this tight end part of the video is because that means that Cole Turner has a way better chance of making this roster now. And even though I haven't heard a lot about him in training camp so far, he must be doing something right to completely take a roster spot from my boy Armani Rodgers. So I'm hoping that and assuming that Cole Turner is having a good camp and is going to be a good player for us, because there's just no way you cut Armani Rodgers unless you're at least somewhat sure that the guys you're cutting them for to keep are pretty good players. Also, again, shouts out to Zach Ertz. We talked about it earlier, but he did have the catch of the day today with a one-handed sideline grab. I already showed y'all the clip earlier. Of course, the fans loved it, and everybody keeps talking about how Jaden Daniels and Zach Ertz right now, that connection is not only strong, but it seems uncoverable at this point, with the nuance of Zach Ertz knowing how to use his leverage against DBs and linebackers are getting open at the last second. Him and Jaden Daniels have this timing to where the moment that Zach Ertz breaks on his route, the ball is already there. There's no hope of covering it. Even an elite corner really has no chance when the timing is just that perfect, the timing and accuracy. So that connection is strong. Remember, Serge the Shooter even said, make sure you follow him on Twitter. He's always taking great pictures, the best pictures of the Commanders practice. But he said that, hey, yeah, man, y'all may want to grab Zach Ertz in fantasy because that connection is strong. He's been going to the practices. He's been seeing Jaden Daniels and Zach Ertz a lot, especially you've been seeing clips of touchdowns specifically between those two. Then moving on to offensive line. Ref the District again pointed out the fact that the offensive linemen were wearing pads, but nobody else. Now, I don't know if that lasted the entire practice, but at least at a certain point in practice, there was just like a weird thing going on there. Shouts out to Sam Fortier for also pointing out the fact that no surprise that Jaden Daniels is quarterback one. We knew that, but Coleman seems ahead of even where the team expected at this point. And Dan Quinn even said something about that they are surprised by how far ahead Brandon Coleman is in his development and how good he is already. And Sam Fortier went on to continue to say, would be a big deal if the new regime hit on left tackle. And then Zach Selby finished up his article after practice talking about the offensive line. He said Kingsbury also addressed the possible concerns about the offensive line, which is still going through the process of finding a new starting lineup for real, because Andrew Wiley's been dealing with tightness that's limited him in practice. And out of all of the injuries to our offensive line, that's the one I'm worried about the most, not necessarily because of the player, but because of the injury. We've just been hearing about tightness. It's been this just super ominous, like super ambiguous, we don't know exactly what it means, tightness label on him, and it's been keeping him out of practice for like over a week now. We'll see if he practices against the Jets, but I don't know what's going on there. And then you also have Samuel Cosme, who's missed 2 days with an illness. Then you have Brandon Coleman, your starting left tackle on the depth chart. He seems to be a starting left tackle, but he missed practice so far. And Zach Selby even also pointed out the fact that even though he's just started today, he's far from being named the starter for week 1 yet. He has to pass a few tests, joint practices, Jets and Dolphins, preseason games, Jets and Dolphins, we'll see. And then he also said, and with so many new pieces, the group is still learning how to work with each other, which has been my point. The chemistry is not there yet, and that's what worries me the most. Cliff Kingsbury has been impressed, though, with how the position has handled the situation. He said, quote, "That's a very prideful and tough group of young men, so I feel great about where it's heading. Health is always an issue, but that group is working as hard as any group in the building," unquote. And that's good praise there. That's good to hear. Now, moving on to the defensive line, Mason Kinahan pointed out the fact that the defensive line was crushing the offensive line today in practice. And first of all, I would kind of assume that our defensive line, even when our offensive line is healthy, would outperform them at least at times in practice. We have a really good, especially interior defensive line, which is crazy right now. Like strength versus strength, the interior part of our offensive line is our best part, and the interior part of our defensive line is the best part there. So it's really strength versus strength there. But still, overall, I would expect our defensive line to be further ahead, at least with chemistry with each other, than what our offensive line has right now, especially with the injuries to the offensive line. And speaking of injuries, we had 3 out of our 5 projected starting offensive linemen out today. Your starting left tackle, your starting right tackle, and your starting future all-pro right guard, I believe, in Samuel Cosme. So I just feel like we should have assumed that the defensive line would dominate today, but it's interesting to hear confirmation that they actually for real did. And then shouts out to Zach Selby, because he pointed out the fact that Joe Witt seemed to be very pleased with Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen, and said that they've both done a great job against the run and setting the edge so far. We'll see how that goes. And then linebacker wise, we don't have a lot to talk about other than the fact that when Joe Witt Jr., of course the defensive coordinator, was speaking after practice, he said that one thing that impressed him about Bobby Wagner was how fast he sprints to the ball, even in drills. Said he told him he could even ease up a little bit. Nope, Wagner often the first linebacker to the ball every time, no matter what drills, team scrimmages, whatever. Bobby Wagner is leading by example. You can lead by voice, but he's also leading by example, and I love that. Cornerback wise, of course, there's the observation that Emmanuel Forbes was not a starter on the first unofficial depth chart, and I think that pretty much means that he'll be a backup for the first preseason game, according to Dan Quinn. But Joe Witt Jr., first of all, after practice, said that he's been really pleased with Emmanuel Forbes' work ethic and how he's added weight. And then also, my point is, when you're watching practices, Emmanuel Forbes has easily been the starter. If anything, that one day that I think Tariq Castro-Fields started, Benjamin St. Juste moved back to the backups and was with the second stringers with Michael Davis. Like, Emmanuel Forbes has arguably been the most consistent outside corner at being out there with the starters out of anybody. So I thought that was probably the weirdest part of the entire depth chart, because he literally is a starter right now based on the way that they not only how well he's played in practice, going toe-to-toe with Terry McLaurin and John Dodson, but also just by the way that they divvy up the snaps. He's out there with the starters more than any other outside corner on this roster. So I just thought that was weird. I don't know if it's a strategy thing. I don't know. I don't know what came. Again, it sounds like Dan Quinn and like the actual coaches are not responsible for this depth chart. This was something that the staff put together, according to John Com, from what I've heard. But still, man, if you're just watching the practices, that's weird. Also, Joe Witt Jr. talked about rookie cornerback Mike Sanverstill, who's one of the starting rookies already on this unofficial depth chart. He said, quote, "He has a command of the star position. He does not walk around like he's a rookie," unquote. And that is very high praise. Then Zach Selby talked about the fact that there was a lot of one-on-one action today, like I told y'all before we even dove into the practice, between the wide receivers and the defensive backs, because Dan Quinn really wanted to emphasize that today. And while the drill is designed for receivers to win, like I've been screaming at y'all for years now, one-on-one drills are literally set up for receivers to win. There were some defenders who came up with impressive plays. One of them was Q Blue Kelly, who's been getting beat quite a bit lately. I mean, that one play, who was it? I forgot who did it, but somebody broke his ankles and then was able to have a touchdown catch because Q Blue Kelly was literally flat on the ground after the receiver worked him. I just can't remember which receiver it was. But either way, he broke up a nice pass intended for Luke McCaffrey. And it's an interesting play too, because if you look on the screen right now, Luke McCaffrey had it, like he was open, he got separation. It wasn't really good coverage by Q Blue Kelly, but great job not giving up on the play. And then you got to look at Luke McCaffrey a little crazy, because it's like, man, I mean, you did everything right, but secure the ball all the way through to where it could be counted as a touchdown. And then also you had Chiggy Anusium, who also recorded a pass breakup against Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint, swatting the ball away at the goal line. And I mean, again, y'all know I'm rooting for my Georgia dog, but I'm not hearing great things from him. Just to remind you, when Tyler Owens had that interception a few practices ago, that was because Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint dropped the ball that went through his hands. Safety wise, I don't have any updates. I mean, I dug and I was digging and I was digging. I didn't find any significant updates from anybody in the safety group, but hopefully I can get some information on them the next time I break down practice. Now moving on to special teams, Nikki Javala updated the fact that the Commanders are still trying out 2 more punters post-practice, after practice today, and basically same thing. Like I've been telling y'all for the past couple of practices, Tressway is perfectly fine. They're not moving on from him. He's not hurt. They're just evaluating for not only emergency options, but Tressway is a left-footed kicker, and the Jets have a right-footed punter. And our returners, all of the guys that are doing punt return drills and things like that, competing for the punt return spot, need some experience practicing fielding kicks from a right-footed punter. And so they're bringing in guys to do just that. I wonder how much they're getting paid for that though. Like, how much does a punter get paid to just come in and just do something like that? Can I go out there? What's the price on that? I need to go out there. I'll do it for half or whatever you're giving them. Please, I'll come and do it right now. And then after practice, as promised, Joe Gibbs and Darrell Green addressed the Commanders after practice, as you can see on the screen right now, and they were putting them on. This is some great game, man. I mean, if Darrell Green and Joe Gibbs are talking to you, you listen. And if you wanted to actually hear what they said, the Washington Commanders posted an entire 1 minute, and I believe like second clip of it on their actual official Twitter account. And Joe Gibbs at a certain point had a really funny moment because he went back into coach mode. Everybody was talking and he tried to start talking, but everybody continued talking. He literally just yelled at everybody, shut up. He laughed afterwards, but he seemed pretty serious with that shut up. I'm not gonna lie, that man went back into coach mode for a second. And then also later on, you saw Coach Gibbs just talking specifically to Adam Peters 1v1, and I'm hoping he's giving Adam Peters every drop of knowledge that he possesses, man, please. And then also you have this clip right here of Joe Gibbs meeting Melba. Again, Melba turned 100 years old today, and shouts out to Joe Gibbs for going out of his way to go talk to her and everything like that. That is a great moment in practice. Again, we had so much going on in practice. It was really a movie today. And then also moving on, we have other people's reviews today. We only have one. We have it from Chris Russell at WrestleMania621. He said practice for Commanders over. Both punters and kickers made 4 or 5 kicks to end it. Pretty much a typical practice. I mean, Ramiz Ahmed, I think, has gone 5 of 5 one day and has gone 4 for 5 every other day. And then you had Riley Patterson, the kicker that's competing with him right now. He's your backup kicker, but we need to bring in a third guy because I don't like either of these two guys right now. But I think he had one day where he went 5 for 5 as well, and then he's had a couple of 4 for 5s, and I believe he had 1 or 2 3 for 5. So right now, Riley Patterson is losing the kicker competition to Chris Blewett's backup in the XFL. And also, he pointed out the fact that he didn't think Jaden was overly sharp today, but also also was not bad. And then he also said Trent Scott clearly held a few times at right tackle, so he was out there with the starters, and he did not look good. And then also, before we get up out of here, I have a few random updates for y'all that kind of pertain to the Commanders in certain ways. So first of all, the Jets are already fighting. They had a fight in their practice today, just amongst themselves, not a joint practice with anybody else. Before we even pulled up, before we even had joint practices with them, the Jets were fighting today, as in Tuesday, August 6th. By the time y'all get this, it'll technically be tomorrow, I'm pretty sure. But again, they're already fighting, and with tempers potentially running even higher on Thursday when we actually practice against them, because that's just the nature of joint practices. They're physical, and you're more likely to fight in joint practices than you are practicing amongst yourselves against the people that you care more about. I mean, if they're already fighting each other, it sounds like a fight is destined to happen in our joint practices starting Thursday, man. And I don't really like practice fights in general, but because it just really doesn't really do anything for me specifically, just watching it. Like, I'm not entertained by it. But Rio Robinson still brings up a great point. Even though I'm anti fights in camp, I agree with his take on this. He said fights during joint practices is like a rite of passage, and he also said can't wait to see us bond over a brawl versus the Jets on Thursday. And that is a good point. Joint practices could make your team bond closer just because you have a common enemy now. Because I feel like practice fights do waste time, they risk injury, but these guys clearly have become tired of practicing against each other, and tempers have started to rise. We've noticed practice after practice, things starting to get a little bit chippier every day. And so I'm pretty sure they just cannot wait to go and finally hit and beat up some other team's players to where they don't have to worry about their health and safety as much. And over time, I mean, these guys are probably sick of going 1v1 against the same guys. They're probably starting to become rivals to each other. The offensive line is starting to boil up against the defensive line and vice versa. The receivers and corners are starting to almost hate each other. And then if we were to fight against the Jets, then maybe that puts things into perspective for our players. Like, man, you're not that bad because we have this common enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend type of situation. I know we hate each other throughout the week because I'm sick of going against you every day, all day, and things like that. But we are brothers, and we may fight and argue, but we have the same goal, and I can fight you. You know, I can rough you up, but nobody from another team can. So even as much as we fight when we're off by ourselves and when we're practicing amongst ourselves, I'm not going to let anybody do anything to you. And so maybe that mutual disdain for the Jets players could potentially force the Commanders players to grow closer together. We'll see. Shouts out to Rio Robinson for that theory. I know I dove like way deeper into that than I should have, but I'm with Rio there, man. Again, I don't like camp fights, but I'm with him there. And then shouts out to Hogs Haven for pointing this out, because he said something's probably in that water in New Jersey with all of these Jets and Giants fights. You saw the Giants getting to like 5 different fights over the past 2-3 days, and then now you have the Jets fighting as well. So it's something going on in New Jersey right now. Good job connecting the dots there. Shouts out to Mitch Tisler for also pointing this out as well. He said perhaps the whole team should have skipped OTAs for that ayahuasca retreat, whatever Aaron Rodgers went on, and he was basically just joking and saying that, all right, well, y'all having fights in practice, maybe everybody should have skipped OTAs to go with Aaron Rodgers to do what he did to kind of woosah, basically. And then shouts out to JP Finley for pointing this out, because there's a report that Tyron Smith is not doing team drills for the Jets right now, and I have the same concerns as JP Finley. Smith not practicing 2 days before Washington arrives could be a problem, because we need him to be a real good test for the Commanders pass rush, and hopefully he's healthy. But I mean, his problem is, and the reason that they signed him to the contract that he is, this heavily incentive based, is he struggles to stay healthy, especially with the times that he's been with the Cowboys the last few years. And I don't care about him being healthy for the regular season, but I would love for him to be healthy for these joint practices in this preseason game, so we can truly see what our edge rushers are like. Because if our edge rushers end up going up against backup tackles, what can we really take from the joint practices in preseason? So we'll see. Also, random news: the Washington Commanders have officially gotten their own Bud Light can that is now available in the Washington, D.C. area. So they have their own Bud Light can, as you can see on the screen right now. And it says says official beer sponsor of the Washington Commanders and everything. So shout out to Josh and those guys for getting their money up. They're starting to gain sponsors. We still don't have a sponsor for the stadium right now. Instead of FedEx Field, we just named Commanders Field because we don't have a sponsor there yet. Hopefully they get one sooner rather than later. Also, random news, but still pertaining to the Commanders, former 2020 Commanders 4th round pick Sadiq Charles is retiring today at age 25. And that's already really weird already, retiring at 25. But it's even crazier because he was projected to be the starting right guard for the Titans. Like, even Titans reporters were shocked because he's been getting the most reps with the first team at right guard out of anybody on the roster. So everybody's confused right now. You would think that, okay, he's 25, he's the projected starter. You know, I mean, where did this retirement come out of nowhere? I didn't even hear any reports about him being hurt, so I don't know what's going on there. But hey, man, best of wishes to you. I like this talent coming out of LSU. I'm sad that it didn't work out. Also, the Raiders picked up Dax Milne, who we cut a few days ago. Remember, Scott Turner's over there, so maybe he has something to deal with that with Dax Milne after we cut him, ending up with the Las Vegas Raiders. And then Giants, not only did they work out Dax Milne, brought him in for a visit before he went and signed with the Raiders, they also went and claimed Christian Holmes off waivers. So look at the Giants picking up the guys that we don't want. I mean, I guess I'm not going to call them trash because I liked Christian Holmes and Dax Milne. I'm not going to do them like that. They're still former Commanders, but it seems like the Giants are picking up our scraps right now, and I love the way that sounds. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one, man. I really appreciate y'all. Make sure y'all stay tuned for everything that we have going on. Again, I'm gonna keep y'all updated on every single training camp practice that we get. Any updates, clips, breakdowns, tweets about anything, I got y'all. But there will be some practices, especially now moving forward, where no fans are allowed to go, to where we may not have access to some practices. So in those empty days, I have so much content that I have ready that you'll be getting some type of video every day, no matter what. I'm even getting to the point where even some days you see I'm doing 2 videos a day. So make sure you stiff arm that like button. Do not leave this video without leaving a like. Make sure you subscribe if you're loving the content. And of course, let me know in the comment section how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my points. Again, even if you disagree, I love the criticism and I love for people to explain why they disagree, because I could be wrong about something. And my whole goal is to always be a smarter football fan and analyst whenever I can be. So if I'm wrong, let me know. Call me out on it. Let me know all of that in the comment section. Again, I'm gonna try my best to read and reply to as many comments as possible, but I've just been extreme. This has been a very hectic week, but I'm trying, man. I really appreciate y'all. Make sure y'all stay tuned with another video. Even though I'm releasing this by the time it's coming out, it's technically 12 something, 1 something a.m. Wednesday, August 7th. Be on the lookout for another video coming out August 7th as well. I'm gonna catch y'all later. Appreciate y'all. I'm out.